Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another exciting lecture by your favorite speaker, Dr. Ronald J. Brown. That's me sitting in the subway. In the right and below that is a typical New York City Metro card, which probably is going to be phased out like they phased out the tokens, but there again, nothing stands still. Our topic for today is the New York subway system. Fascinating history. All right, and will be the beginning of transportation in New York City. Don't forget, New York City is a city on islands. It's like Venice. And so it has always had to confront the problem of transportation. So, number one, the age of the horse, which goes back to time immemorial. The age of the steam engine, transforming public transportation and transportation of goods. The arrival of electricity, which enabled public transportation for the first time to go underground. Well, the transportation system began to grow, and that has attracted a lot of interesting little sidebars, such as the golden age of subway graffiti, where I sit in the subway and watch commercials for all kinds of businesses when people can contribute their own artwork. Transportation in the 21st century, what is going on these days. And then remembering the subway, the importance of the subway in New York City culture. So let's get going. Well, old pictures of New York show horses, whether it is a person riding a horse or a horse pulling some kind of wagon or a sled in winter. And then later, public transportation, the trolleys, which were pulled by horses. The bottom on the right, we see the horse pulled some fire trucks. So the horse was part of urban culture, which meant everything associated with horses. The entire industry for feeding the horses. They were not eating grass on cobblestone streets, disposing of the waste. Cows eat grass and hay, and we know what comes out the other end. And so the horse was part of the culture, whether you owned a horse, whether you had your own personal horse and buggy. Department stores transporting their goods by horses and buggies. We see the typical horse and buggy on the left, and this is transportation, public, number 5. We see dead horses laying on the street. This is part of the reform movement to clean up the streets. Below that, we see Fifth Avenue, and it's a moment of glory filled with people on the streets and horses and buggies. So many of these old mansions, which we still see many of them on Fifth Avenue, we don't associate them with horses and buggies because it's part of modern city. But yet, building these giant mansions and cathedrals and stuff was all done during the age of the horse and buggy. Well, the next big transformation in public transportation was the beginning of the steam engine. Whether it was a steam engine, which was stationary, powering the textile factories and steel mills along the Hudson, along the East River of Manhattan, or cities like Chicago and Cleveland, Detroit, which had factories powered by steam engines. Well, steam engines were rapidly adapted to public transportation. On the left, we see the poster for New York and Harlem Railroad. The picture shows a trolley being pulled by horses, but we see above that the Harlem line with the first steam engine. Well, the steam engines that we recognize today, such as the one in the middle picture, were preceded by rather rudimentary steam engines, such as the one on the right. But gradually, beginning in the 1830s, the steam engine started becoming a major fixture of the American cities. The elevated trains were first driven by steam engines, and then by the late 1860s, we had the beginning of electricity. Well, with the invention of electricity, everything began to change. You could put trains, no longer elevated trains, but you could put them underground. As long as they were elevated, they were using steam engines. And so the smoke and the soot and the sparks from the steam engine were spreading across the city. But with the beginning of electricity, it was possible to conceive of trains running underground. The picture at the bottom on the right, we see the heavy black line with the white dots on it. That was the first subway line going from City Hall north to 42nd Street, Grand Central Station, then down to 7th Avenue and Broadway, and then going up the west side of Manhattan. Well, the subways were risky at the beginning. On top September 11, famous date in New York City, 1905, there was a train crash. And we see the steam engine pulling several cars and crashing on 9th Avenue and 53rd Street. So just like today, people getting hit by buses and cars smashing into each other, accidents are part of transportation in general. And on this date, 1905, 11 people were killed. Most of the elevated trains have since been dismantled. There are a couple which still exist. For example, I live in Queens, and we have the famous 7 train, which goes through Queens, up to Flushing, and then into Manhattan, where it goes underground, ending at the Hudson River last station. This is the 7 train in Queens, which opened in 1915. On the left, a picture, we see the elevated train lines going along a section of Queens Boulevard. Well, what was so amazing about this is towns like Flushing, today noted as an Asian city within the city, gradually could be linked to Manhattan. You could live for the first time in Flushing, and you didn't have to take a horse and buggy to get to Manhattan or to take a boat and get to Manhattan. You could jump on the 7 train and you could speed into the city. So it became possible for suburbs to start evolving, largely in Brooklyn and Queens, where it was possible to live in a nice house in the suburbs and work in Manhattan. So gradually, transportation was moving forward. Grand Central Station, the old one, the first one on the right. With the rise of steam engines, the Harlem and New York Railroad could be built, linking Harlem and going up eventually into the Bronx and the mainland of the United States, where thousands of people could come in every morning to Grand Central Station. And so public transportation was becoming a fixture of the city. Cornelius Vanderbilt of Staten Island made his fortune first in boats during the Civil War, linking the Brooklyn and Manhattan and Staten Island and New Jersey, but gradually got into the railroad business, gradually taking over in any way possible the various railroads and combining them into a railroad empire. And there we see on the left one of the American tycoons, Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore Vanderbilt, and the railroad industry. His empire spread not just in the New York City area, but across the country, taking over railroads leading to Pennsylvania. And gradually, by the end of the Civil War, you could get on a train in New York and you could go the whole way to San Francisco. Well, the next big step in public transportation was, of course, the age of electricity. Thomas Edison built the first public commercial generator in Manhattan in 1882. Well, if you were wealthy, you could have him establish a link between the subway and your apartment building or your mansion, more likely, and his generator. So gradually, the city was being slowly and expensively electrified. By 1910, electricity had become so widespread that Broadway became known as the Great White Way. And there you see the various theaters along Broadway with their marquees filled with lights. And gradually, more and more people were able to link their homes with the Edison electrical generating plants. Well, electricity did more than revolutionize transportation. For the first time, you could have electric Christmas trees in your house. Well, before you had electricity with Edison's electric lights, you had to have candles on your tree, which led to no end of house fires. You could also have window shopping. You could have big plate glass windows with electric lights illuminating what was in the store. A revolution in shopping. You could even go window shopping at night when the stores were closed because the windows were illuminated. I love this advertisement on the right for the John Wanamaker store in New York, where you see this guy decorating his Christmas tree. Well, if you look closely, you'll see that this is not a factory worker and his wife, the way he's dressed with his smoking suit. He is definitely an upper class person. He wears more clothes to decorate his Christmas tree than I do when I go to the Metropolitan Opera. But gradually, electricity became more and more popular, going down to the average citizen. 1917, we see that there were still horse-driven trolleys along with the new electric trolleys. Here we see the Steinway line, and they have the old suspenders, we called them, with the power cable going up on top of the bus and linking up with an overhead electric cable. So gradually the horses were being replaced by electric transportation. Well, the electric trolleys also ended up in the garbage can of history, where the new electric buses started taking over. Once again, with the suspenders, overhead cables. The last trolley at the end of the line, 1957. And here we see Queens Plaza at the Queensboro Bridge with the last trolley line. Some places in New York, you can still see the rails, which are still in the highway. They haven't been dug up. They've just been left there, but they're still a vestige of the golden age of trolleys. Well, with electricity, as I said, you could go underground. Abram Stevens Hewitt was considered the father of the New York subway system. The first line was inaugurated in 1904. On the right, we see the City Hall station, and that was where the subway began. And it went up to 42nd Street, turned left, west to Broadway, and then went up the west side of Manhattan. Gradually, the new subway system started including the outlying boroughs. The Brooklyn Bridge opened in 1882, and gradually other bridges started linking the independent city of Brooklyn with the city of New York. Most New York subway systems were built with the trench system, which meant that you dug a big ditch in the highway, put down the railroad lines, and then you covered it over. So the subway is not deep underground in most of the places of New York. It is just below ground, and it would be covered over with a roof of steel and cement, and that would be the highway. And so you see in these pictures the transition. On the right, you see the picture. On the left, you see a horse and buggy going down the street. On the right, you see people standing beside an electric trolley as it goes over a construction site for the subway. In other cities, the subway was built deep underground, such as Moscow, where it is deep underground. They tunnel underground, and so they don't disturb public transportation on the surface. Whereas in New York, the subway was barely underground, and you can still be walking along the streets and you see the grill and you can watch a subway going by. The IRT line was the very first subway line. On the right, you see the map going from City Hall and Brooklyn Bridge, Grand Central, Times Square, and up the west side. And you see the various stops going through Old City Hall, Lower Manhattan, the whole way up to the new areas, the new suburbs in the 140s and 137s. And this was the revolution in transportation. Today, the IRT line includes the lines 4, 5, 6, and 7, as well as 1, 2, and 3, which have taken over sections of the old IRT. But old timers still use names like IRT. Here again, we see the gradual growth of the IRT, Interborough Rapid Transit Company. And we see the line going up to Harlem along the Hudson River, with a new branch breaking off at Upper West Side and going up through the center of modern Harlem. So in the early 1900s, you could live in Harlem, jump on the train, go down to Manhattan to your job in the bank. The old stations were preserved. This is the City Hall station. See, it's cast iron and, very ornate. On the right, we see another station, which was really quite interesting. This is the Upper West Side. Today, there are, I believe it's still valid, 472 subway stations. In the beginning, you paid a simple 5-cent piece, but gradually you had the first tokens, which we see at the above picture in 1953 when it became 15 cents. And then by 1986, it was $1. 1993, the first Metro card was introduced. And then you had various versions of these old subway tokens, which are collector's items. Today, you can use your credit card or any type of charge card and just tap and go. So you don't have to carry around the Metro card like I do. You can use just any type of card and it will automatically charge your credit card. I believe it is still $275 unless you are a senior, and then I think it's $135. So I have the Metro Card Senior. One of the first big subway deaths was 1918, and there we see an estimated 93 to 102 in the Brighton Tunnel wreck. And it was a major subway disaster. And that remains a big problem because if a train crashes, you just can't run, because if there's flames or type of debris, you have to run along the tunnel to get to an emergency exit. The Melbourne Street wreck books were written about it, pictures were taken, and you see the bodies being laid out and hopefully identified by the various families. Gradually, the 5 boroughs consolidated, and the subway system started going to Queens, started going to Brooklyn, and up into the Bronx. The only part of New York that is not linked to the subway system is the island of Staten Island. You still have to take a ferry or drive to Staten Island. The various lines, such as the IRT and other lines, were gradually consolidated into the New York City subway system. Before that, they had been privately owned. Gradually, the city took them over and made it part of the city administration. This was all carried out in 1940. 840 miles of track. The A line is the longest. It goes the whole length of Manhattan and then deep into Brooklyn. And of course, the trains changed every couple of years. They'd be replaced. Now they have air conditioning and generally pretty good announcement systems. The MTA, Metropolitan Transportation Authority, that's what we call it, a Metro card, links the Bronx, Manhattan, Queens, and Brooklyn. And from places like Jamaica in Queens, you can link up there with another train system, and this would be the Long Island Railroad. Or north in the Bronx, you can link up with the Metro North. So the MTA is subway and includes buses. And the Metro card is very often good in places in Long Island. It links up with Metro North, Staten Island Railroad, the bus system, toll bridges, except the Metro card, and the 2 tunnels. So the MTA is more than just a subway system. It is an entire transportation empire linking the city, as well as various counties in New York and 2 counties in Connecticut. Well, the subway grew, constantly expanded, and it reflected very much the zeitgeist of the particular period. For example, in the 1970s, when New York City was in dire financial straits and on the verge of bankruptcy, the city basically could no longer maintain the subway system, and it deteriorated rapidly. This is the golden age of graffiti. Personally, I would much prefer to see a train with all this artwork on it and graffiti as sort of a public expression of people's ideas and discontent, rather than the advertisements that we see today constantly bombarding us by this. On the left, we see the Daily News of October 30th, 1975, when the city government requested Washington to come to its aid to bail it out. And allegedly, President Ford told the city, "We'll no more handouts from Washington." Well, the 1970s era inspired a whole lot of subway movies. The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 captures the fear of subway riding gangs, attacks, rapes, robberies in the subway as it was deteriorating in the 1970s, with Denzel Washington and John Travolta in his younger years. Pelham 1, 2, 3 really marked the low point of the subway. But the subway continued to be the major form of public transportation. Here we see the Times Square 42nd Street station. This is one of the oldest stations going back to 1904. And we see today it is no longer the IRT, it is the N, the Q, the R, the W, the S shuttle, and subways 1, 2, 3, and 7, with underground access by a long tunnel to the A, C, and E at 8th Avenue. So the subway remains, in spite of its low period in the 70s, remained the main feature of New York public transportation. Saturday Night Fever, another movie featuring subway transportation. Again, you see all of the graffiti on the walls of the subway. Another movie, Subway Stories. Anything can happen under the city that never sleeps, based on the joyful, absurd, hilarious, exhilarating, true stories of what goes on underground. And it's not just crime. People exposing themselves and having sex in the subway, smoking pot, gangs taking over subway stations. This remains part of the subway history. People have painted the elevated train, such as the 7 in the upper left. Subway entertainers acting with music, with gymnastics, all kinds of things. Some of the musicians are really quite good. It's subway entertainment. Kids running to jump on a subway train and go subway surfing, standing on the roof of the subway, or riding between the cars where they can smoke and impress everybody else. So the whole subway system inspired its own artwork, its own culture, its own unique history. Beneath the streets, the hidden relics of New York's subway system. I used to go to a rather sleazy bar in Lower Manhattan, which was in a subway station underground that was no longer being used. And there are many of these stations which have been taken over by homeless people. The whole homeless population living in subway tunnels, abandoned rooms off of the subway, and even abandoned subway stations. A book, Catherine Ryan Heed, called Subway, Cancer, and Other Stories. I have no idea what the book is about, but it again evokes subway. Cartoons devoted to subway, music inspired by subway riding. Susie Orman Schnall, The Subway Girls, again celebrating subway culture. Well, gradually, the subway was salvaged, and today it is being rebuilt and upgraded, which also causes no end to subway delays and breakdowns. But what can we do? Now, as we move into 21st century, transportation is again undergoing a revolution. As USS Enterprise in the original Star Trek series, according to Star Trek, in the future, we won't need buses or trains or subways or any other type of physical transport. If I'm in Queens and I want to go to the Metropolitan Opera, I will simply dial up a certain number and I will be beamed to the Metropolitan Opera. Well, we are not to that point yet. And so when we say beam me to the Metropolitan Opera, Scotty, I think we're going to have to wait. But still, transportation in New York remains a major issue. Don't forget, New York, like Venice, is a city of islands. And so we not only build tunnels for subways and bridges for subways to link the city with the outside world, the subway system still does not link New York City to New Jersey. We can take the subway to the Bronx, which is on the mainland, but building a subway link under the Hudson River to link the city once and for all with the continent still remains a dream. There's a plan to continue the 7 line, which goes from Flushing, Queens, through Manhattan, across Manhattan, and link it to a line in New Jersey with a brand new underground tunnel. Whether that will ever be built is a big question, but still, it is one of the challenges of the 21st century. Transportation in the future will be no longer physical transportation, but as the wonderful movie, The Lawn Mower Man, one of my favorite shows, that we will gradually leave our physical body behind. And I will be able to email myself to Paris for a wonderful vacation, taking on whichever body I want to, or just living in a robot, which will have magnificent eyes and remember everything. So transportation of the future is no longer going to be transporting human bodies, but it will be transporting our minds by a cell phone to someplace else. Transcendence, again, shows the future of transportation, where we leave behind our human body. Since time immemorial, transportation has been transporting materials, transporting humans, transporting all kinds of other physical objects. But in the future, once we are liberated from this bag of water and protein, we will no longer need physical transportation. As in the movie Transcendence with Johnny Depp, we will simply email ourselves someplace else and take on the body of our choice. So I could email myself to Brooklyn. I no longer have to take the E or the F to Manhattan and then switch to a train that goes to Brooklyn. And then I can take on whichever body I want to. This is going to be the next big revolution in transportation. Beam me to Shanghai for the weekend, Scotty, and I will no longer have to sit in some terrible cramped seat on an airline to eat airline food and suffer for 12 or 24 hours. I'm waiting for this new revolution in transportation. Well, we are still in the age of the subway. It's still here, and I take it all the time. We have the New York City Transit Museum, which opened in 1976 at a low point in New York subway history. It is the former Court Street station in Brooklyn, where they have examples of old stations, of old subway cars. The stations have become less elegant than they were in 1904 when the system was being built. On the right, you see the Court Street station, which is where the museum is. It's a simple cast iron entrance with some little decorations and the classic green light bulb, which shows that the station is open. Sometimes late at night, certain isolated stations will be shut because of security concerns, and then the light will turn red, meaning this entrance is no longer open because it is too late. The museum shows all kinds of trivial information about the subway. The big debate, horse cars versus rabbit transit. If the fare was 5 cents and 6 cents in the old days, is 7 cents too much? 7 cents, I suppose, back in 1918 was a lot more than it is today. The Subway Sun, published by the Subway System. Paris subways close at night. New York is a 24-hour town. Big problem when you visit other cities. Many subway systems shut down at night, but the New York subway system, well, it might have fewer trains running in the middle of the night, and they might be local rather than express, but you can still get home no matter how long you've been out partying and how drunk you are. Litter, of course, one newspaper left behind becomes a pile of newspapers. Well, that's a bit dated because nobody reads newspapers anymore in the subway. Everybody's there with their cell phone reading it online. But still, garbage is a major problem. I always take a can of something to drink or even a beer in a paper bag and drink it, but I don't leave it in the subway. But it's not at all rare to get in the subway and to find that it's been taken over, a car has been taken over by homeless people, and piles of shopping carts filled with junk and garbage left behind. On the left, we see a photograph in the museum from the good old days in the 70s, graffiti everywhere, people sleeping in the subway, and the cop with his German Shepherd trying to make sure that crime doesn't happen. We see a train car at the upper left with the entrance at the end rather than the entrances in the middle as we have today. The seats have changed. Today they are hard plastic, but at one time they were covered with a cloth type thing or wooden seats. The lights have changed. The windows have changed. And today they are almost all air conditioned with elevators linking many of the stations, but yet not all. Subway crime, 1984. Bernie Goetz was convicted of one count of carrying an unlicensed firearm, served 8 months of a 1-year sentence. This was where he was being accosted by the 4 guys on the right, and he simply took out his gun and shot them. Here again, subway crime is probably as old as the subway. More recently, homeless people have taken over subway stations and even moved into subway trains. It's not at all rare to get on a subway and the stench is horrendous and you see everybody moving to another car. Our good friend the rat is become immune to every known poison, knows every known trap or every known human attempt to eradicate them. So it's not at all rare to be waiting for a subway and to see a family of rats running around, and sometimes I'll even throw them a bit of bread if I happen to be eating. New York subway rats are notorious for being aggressive and for being survivors. There is still an underground world called the mole people. These are people who take over underground stations. They decorate them, such as the picture on the right, where you see a couple have literally set up home in a room that is in the subway. And generally, the police don't bother people. They just live there. Entire books written about the mole people, as well as New York City tunnel rats, explorers of the transit system. It's not at all rare for young guys to get a group of people and to go exploring unused stations, unused tunnels, and even spend time living down there. One of the stations I go to is the Hellfire Club. That's my good friend Lenny, who took over a disused subway station at 9th Avenue and 14th Street in a meatpacking district and turned it into a disco called the Hellfire Club. It no longer exists. That whole area, as part of the redevelopment, is now filled with expensive coffee shops and restaurants. But that was an area where the railroad would bring cattle from the Midwest to New Jersey. In New Jersey, they'd be loaded onto barges before they built tunnels under the river, brought to the meatpacking district, and the cows and the animals would be slaughtered in the meatpacking district around 14th Street. The meat would be put in packages and sent off to the grocery store. So it was a very unsavory place. It smelled of blood. The blood would be flowing in the streets, and it was the kind of place where some really wild clubs would flourish. There again, that's all part of history. Another subway story, the famous view of Marilyn Monroe over a grate which covered the subway. So when a train would pass, the hot air would come pouring out the grate. And if a woman happened to be wearing a dress, well, it would go flying. And this was 1954, where allegedly this photograph was taken. And it inspired T-shirts, the 7-Year Itch with Marilyn Monroe and Tom Ewell. Again, a glorious moment in the history of the New York subway system. Take the A train. The Harlem Quartet plays the music of Wynton Marsalis, Bill Strayhorn, and more. Here again, the A train to Harlem goes through Brooklyn, goes up Manhattan, and right through the heart of Harlem. Sometimes an underground subway station will be taken over as a very romantic setting for a fashion show, such as the one in the upper left. Gives a little bit of exotic allure to a fashion show. Some of the stations were highly decorated, especially in the 1940s and 20s. You see the Bowery Station with its tile work and decorative work. The urban legend of crocodiles thriving in the subway system. Movie Alligator, a great thrilling movie. Very often, this story is people will buy a baby alligator as a house pet, but when it gets too big, people will take it down and either dump it into the sewers or let it go in the subway system, because there's always water flowing in the subway system. And so the legends of people spotting alligators and snakes and other animals in the subway. In fact, many people say it's not a legend. It is the truth. One of the decorative things at the bottom shows an alligator jumping out of the sewer system and taking a child. Another legend. Giant rats. Here again, part of the subway culture, Revenge of the Rats, evil underground, where the rats decide to get organized and escape their underground world, start attacking people and taking over the subway system. Deadly Eyes. Tonight they will rise from the darkness beneath the cities. Again, showing picture of New York with the Empire State Building, celebrating the rat culture of the New York subway system. Well, there's me again, sitting in the subway with an advertisement. You see the plastic seats, which they have. No more graffiti, because the interior and exterior of the trains have been painted with a certain product that any graffiti can be wiped off very easily. Well, as cities surge into the 21st century, such as Dubai with its elevated trains and subways, magnificent subway systems, transportation is surging into the future. Whether they will be elevated trains and small vessels such as the one in the picture, this is going to be transportation of the future. As much as Americans love their private automobile, subway cars are going to be part of our culture, especially in the cities. As I speak, the mayor has been threatening to have a tax on automobiles into the bottom half of Manhattan, congestion pricing, which is now being heavily debated, where the government says, stop driving your individual gas or electric car into the city and start taking public transportation. So on this city of islands, transportation remains a major issue. So if you'd like to contact me, ronbrownmedia@gmail.com. I always welcome comments, criticisms, updates, and if you have any questions, I will respond. So this is Ron Brown, thanking you for joining me today for this talk, and I hope to see you in the future. So have a good day.